Well, hi, everyone. You guys braved the cold to make it here in person. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for those of you here in the room with us. For those of you not in the room with us, I hope you're warm wherever you are, especially if you're in the Boston area with the deep Arctic freeze that's moving in. What better way to warm up, though, than to have heartwarming intellectual discourse? So, plus hot coffee in the back. So first, I'm Fatima Sumar. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for International Development. It's such a pleasure to see all of you. Welcome back to campus for those of you coming back. And we are here to officially kick off our spring series, speaker series at CID at the Center for International Development. And I'm thrilled with the speaker we have. We have one of my favorite people and a real champion and a gender avenger, as I like to call her, to kick off our CID speaker series for the spring. Before I do that, a couple of quick administrative things. First, if you could quick help us out, there's a QR code up here. If you haven't already checked in, there's also one in the back. If you haven't checked in, if you could take the 2 seconds to check in for us, it really helps us organize these events better and make this work for all of you. The second is that this is a hybrid event, so we'll be asking questions from both here in the room, but also virtually. And we'll pass a mic around. Even though you may be able to hear us, we want to make sure our participants online can hear us as well. So please do use the mic. We are recording today's session, but we'll keep the camera on the speaker only while ensuring that your voices are heard and recorded. And then this event will be available on our CID YouTube channel. Do check it out. What better way to take a walk through the woods and listen to the CID YouTube channel and podcast? And before I introduce Mara, one request from our esteemed visitor and speaker today. This will be an interactive conversation and discussion. So if you're not sitting next to somebody physically in the room, for those of you that are in the room, please, as comfortable as you'd like to be with space, please try to be near somebody because there's going to be a part where you're going to be talking to each other. So if you could organize yourselves appropriately for that space. We do have lots of seats here up front for those of you that are joining in, so please feel free to come on up. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, Mara Bolis. Mara is a seasoned leader with 25 years of experience in development finance, economics, business, and policy advocacy dedicated to women's equality here at home and all around the world. She's currently with the social enterprise consulting firm Value for Women, where she advises the senior leadership team on strategy and supports clients to achieve more equitable outcomes through adjustments to their business and investment processes. She combines her experience leading corporate influencing, shareholder advocacy, and impact investing initiatives with a deep background on women's economic empowerment, and she has worked with women's rights leaders from all around the world. She has been a leader at the Marshall Plan for Moms, at Oxfam America, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Exim Bank, and the Development Finance Corporation, parts of the US government. She's also been interviewed by Forbes, Bloomberg, and the Washington Post. She's been a speaker at the Skold World Forum, the OECD, many universities, and she's the author of many influential articles on investing, social impact, and women. What better way to kick off our series, Mara, than to have you here? Thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So, thank you so much for joining me today. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, great. So, yes, I am Mara Bolis, and I'm a consultant at Value for Women, which is a wonderful institution. If you haven't heard of it, take a look. Tons of resources on the topic that we're talking about today. And a longtime gender advocate, as Fatima said. Welcome to the dangerous story of women and data. And this talk is about how a lack of data on the differing experiences between men and women undermines development outcomes and hurts women in the process. 2 notes before we get started. The first is that we have a much more sophisticated understanding of people living outside of the binary of men and women than I had when I first started doing this work. And data is tremendously lacking in terms of women. In terms of non-binary people, there is not enough data in order to do proper respect to their experiences. So that's where we are as a sector. Again, a data gap. The second caveat, which is a little bit more lighthearted, is that as I prepared to come and to see you today, you will notice that my outfit matches my presentation, which is a little weird, right? So, but I didn't have time to either change the outfit or change the presentation. So you just have a speaker who matches her slides. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's what it is. Okay. So my first question for you, next slide, please. My first question for you is going to be an interactive one where I'm going to ask you to talk to each other for a couple minutes. And the question is, what are the societal effects of climate change that first come to mind for you? Just asking that question. What are the outcomes? And take just a minute, find a buddy, a new friend, even, and just chat amongst yourselves. I'm going to give it 2 minutes. Okay, that was about 2 minutes. That was about 2 minutes. And you all are talkers, which is great. Hi, back talkers. Hi. So you have to have an answer to this question because I gave 2 of them up there. So no one is allowed to not have an answer to this question. So I'm going to just pick a couple, just raise your hand if you have something that you'd like to share in terms of a societal effect of climate change. Come on, you were all talking. Yes, please. Mm-hmm. Correct. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mara, let me make sure the mic gets there so our online audience can hear.
We thought about access to drinking water. When there's no drinking water, it's women that have the burden of finding and getting water for all of the family. So they finally get all of their time spent in that.
Yeah.
And it's very hard work.
Yeah. This is a sophisticated group. I knew it was going to be a sophisticated group. So thank you. Absolutely spot on, right answers. How many of you said domestic violence? Okay. There's some exceptionally smart people in the back of the room. No, you're all exceptionally smart. It's not your fault. It's the fault of the lack of data. We know that floods, wildfires, droughts, and other extreme weather events linked to climate change lead to more domestic violence. So this was a podcast, this is a topic of a podcast last week, Washington Post Reports podcast. And what the podcast was really about was the fact that there's a lack of data demonstrating the connection. They did, just for illustrative purposes, they talked about one particular study in Kenya that looked at data over a 6-year period and then looked at the counties that had experienced severe weather events and those that hadn't, and those that had a 60% higher incident of domestic violence recorded than those that hadn't. Next slide, please. This is a really long slide, and it does everything that people say you shouldn't do on a slide, which is put on too many words. But I kept it anyway because it's so illustrative of the point that I wanted to make. So during the podcast, Martine Powers, the podcast host, she asks her interviewee how long this link has been studied. And she says, we don't have real studies because we don't have the data. We have scientists telling us about climate change and severe weather, and we have folks saying, yeah, there's definitely a link. We've seen it. But that's anecdotal. We need more information, more data, so that it's authoritative. And those in a position to provide resources can act on it, because it's not something that may or may not happen. It's something that we know happens. Friends, there is the dangerous data gap. And women are suffering, and many are dying as a result. If we had the data, we could build in increased funding for domestic violence shelters, pre-response initiatives, along other post-disaster response needs that we plan for. We don't plan for this because we don't have the data, and we're not making the policy. When I first, next slide, please. When I first started my career, I was working at OPIC, which is now the Development Finance Corporation. And I was working on projects that were facilitating foreign direct investment into emerging markets. And I'm going to tell you a story of failure from that time, of my failure. So travel with me now back to Bulgaria in the late 1990s. And let me prepare you, it is bleak. The Bulgarian economy was in shambles. The economy was in recession after the fall of the Soviet Union. GDP per capita was low, and the poverty rate was at 20%. The energy sector was hugely inefficient. Only 20% of households were served by district heating systems. And mass privatization of power plants were planned, which would have meant higher costs for individuals amid low wages and a fraying social safety net. They desperately needed to increase the amount of electricity and power that could get to families. Many families resorted to using harmful indoor wood-burning stoves, which, as I'm sure many of you know, cause respiratory distress and lung damage and other terrible outcomes. For whom? For women, who are primarily responsible for cooking and who are in most contact with those unclean cooking environments. So I went to Bulgaria to conduct due diligence on this project for OPIC. And these trips, as Fatima can attest, are a long series of meetings, one after another. They're like 12-hour days. You're meeting with the US and Foreign Commercial Service, the Bulgarian government representatives. In this case, we're meeting with officials from the Bulgarian power plant that we're looking to do this work with. And this project, like I said, was very important to the Bulgarian government specifically. They really wanted our support. Our team from OPIC, we had leverage, right? So we could bring up policy issues that were important to us. So now I'm going to have you pretend to be me in this situation, and we're going to take 2 minutes, and you're going to talk to your new friends about what you would have asked, what you think. Oh, next slide, sorry. What would have been the most relevant questions to ask from a societal standpoint, the effect on women of power distribution, power and electricity distribution, energy poverty, like what would you have wanted to know? Policy formation, programs Bulgarians were planning, what would you have wanted to know? What would you have asked? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes and go. Can you fix me?
It seems like it's going in and out. Maybe if we do, or if we, what if we flip it the other direction?
Yeah, of course. Okay, that was about 2 minutes. That was about 2 minutes. I've been told you can't hear me in the back, so I'm gonna scream more. That was about 2 minutes, talkers. 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 Okay, great. Who wants to pretend to be me on a due diligence trip to Bulgaria in the 1990s? I don't blame you if you don't want to take up that role, but who wants to take a shot at what I could have asked, what you would want to ask? Otherwise, Fatima's going to have to do it. No one? You have demonstrated your deep wisdom already.
Hi, so I presume like you had the desk research before going. Therefore, in this desk research, you would have found the most significant gaps. I would try to push on these gaps to understand how they are affected in more disproportionately, like women or people of low socioeconomic status.
Yeah, awesome. You would have done disaggregated gender data. You would have looked at the experiences of men and women and see where there are gaps, and you would focus in on that piece. In this case, in electricity poverty, you would look at the ramifications that were happening with women on the ground, right? And particularly the women that were most poor, most vulnerable. And then you would have asked, okay, so what are the policy measures that you're considering given the condition that women are facing, right, at that time? It's an excellent answer. Does anyone else have anything they want to share? No one wants to be in Bulgaria in the 90s. No, it's actually lovely.
I can be Bulgarian.
Sorry?
I can be a Bulgarian.
Okay. I loved it. Sophia is beautiful. The architecture is amazing.
Okay. I was actually born in the Soviet Union.
Mm.
So I will be a mother, a Bulgarian mother.
Mm.
And my husband used to work in a factory. And because of the lack of electricity, the factory went bankrupt.
Mm.
And my husband went into drinking, heavy drinking. Yeah. So I would leave my job as a teacher, and I will go to either Germany or somewhere to provide for my family. So I would ask you to help me with childcare and better hours at the school for my children.
Excellent, excellent illustration of, we were just brought right there, right? You were feeling the effect, the societal effect on a family and what the ramifications are and what policy measures could be to address it. Excellent. So these would have been great questions for me to ask. You know what I asked? Nothing. I asked nothing about the role of women. I asked nothing about the implications for them, either positive or negative. I didn't think to ask. Next slide, please. During my trip, the topic of women never once came up. I never met with a woman in an official capacity. We didn't talk about how women could benefit or how they might be harmed by this power plant project. And literally, the only time the question about a woman came up from a substance, and I'm not even joking, like you're gonna think I'm joking, I'm not joking. I did not make this up, was when a Bulgarian government official asked me to translate a dirty joke from Russian into English for my executive vice president that I was traveling with. This was very uncomfortable for me. DFC's mission was to support US companies contributing to economic growth in emerging markets. The project meant jobs and income generation and GDP. And the theory of change was that growth would contribute naturally to poverty alleviation. And further, the assumption was that either men and women would benefit equally, or that the benefits that accrue to men would somehow trickle down to women. Now, this blindness to women's experience is not project specific, it's systemic. So I want to read for you from a World Bank paper in 1989. This paper reviewed all the major World Bank economic reports and country strategy papers from that period. And it led the author to conclude, the role of women in the development process has rarely been integrated into the strategic thinking underlying country assistance programs. Women had been erased, at best, passive participants in a story about men. It's my view that women's roles weren't taken into consideration in economic development initiatives because it was assumed that they had none. And there are many underlying reasons for this, but a key one is data or lack thereof. So I'm gonna bring in another example. I was reading this amazing article about labor force surveys, which I mean, I know, doesn't that sound amazing? It's like, it sounds really exciting. It was very exciting. So they were talking about how labor force surveys in Uganda and many other places around the world, that in those, they only recorded a person's primary activity within the labor force. So in so doing, they vastly underestimated the economic contributions of women for whom paid work is often a secondary occupation, with the first being housewife or something similar to that. Now, I think everyone in this room is aware that the women in the countries that we work with, as well as here, who have care responsibilities, which is many of us, rarely have the luxury of doing a single thing at once. It's not how it works. As their care work is constant, women's paid work must adapt to what's possible within the constraints of those responsibilities. So women often have no choice but to engage in care work as their primary activity, with paid work coming second. Okay, now we're going back to the labor force survey in Uganda, yeah? They reworked their labor participation survey in 1993. And then they included a question about a second area of activity. And the result was that the Ugandan labor force increased by 10% from one year to the next. 700,000 people, with a majority being women. So as you can see, data gathering that does not consider the diverse experiences of men and women can lead to inaccurate research findings. It can also result in bad programming. Next slide, please. I'm going to share a final example, and this is an example that is so gutting to me. When I read this, after I read this, it's like, you know, that moment where you learn something and then you're like, I will never see things the same way again. Like, this is just like that. So households counted as food secure around the world house many women who are in fact hungry. A study in Southeast Asia showed that the majority of female respondents in this study reported being likely to eat last and least, contributing to their undernutrition. The slide's authors state, as we see here, we should not presume that resources are equitably distributed, nor should we assume that nutritional achievements are equitably distributed within households. Next slide, please. Yet that is exactly what we do. Major international organizations charged with tackling hunger and food insecurity routinely gather data at a household level. Usually, the interviewee is the male head of household, the breadwinner. If you might ask a male head of household if he is experiencing food insecurity, the man, having recently eaten, or being too ashamed to acknowledge the fact that there are hungry individuals in his household, is likely to respond that his household is food secure. Now, for this next part of my talk, I'm going to focus a little, I'm going to pick on the World Food Program a little bit, but anyway, then you'll see the bigger picture in a little bit. So an evaluation of the World Food Program's gender policy undertaken in 2020 showed that food assistance programs collect the vast majority of their data at WFP and at country level on the household, not individual level. When they collect on an individual level, they very rarely gender disaggregate. which would be critical, right, to understand the gender composition in terms of how effective their programs are being. Meanwhile, World Food Program in that same year reported that half the people that they served were women and girls, amounting to over 54 million mothers, daughters, and sisters every year. In fact, if WFP's data gathering is happening at a household net level, this number must be the outcome of an assumption rather than a fact. When I worked at Oxfam, I used to get really annoyed with people who didn't understand this. Who didn't get it, right, Fatima? I would get so amazingly annoyed. And what I now know is that this tendency isn't project specific and it isn't institution specific. As I said, it's structural. The development world, like so much of the rest of the world, suffers from a blindness caused by a male unless otherwise indicated approach, as coined by UK author Caroline Criado Perez in her amazing book, Invisible Women. We make this assumption all the time, all the time. So I'm going to share a not fun fact. People say fun fact. This is a not fun fact. Until 2022, all crash test dummies were male. All of them, male. Remember the Volkswagen commercials? They're all guys sitting in there. Cars have not been designed to ensure the safety of women. And the data bears it out. Women have a 71% higher rate of injury from car accidents in this country, and a 17% in the US, and a 17% higher fatality rate. As you can see, so much of the research that our projects and our programs are built upon is informed by male respondents speaking on behalf of humanity. Next slide, please. Okay, so now say you're gonna have another task. So now say you are developing a development project that has identified women as insufficiently benefiting from a resource or an activity. I want you to take a second, or maybe you can just call it out actually. What is the typical programming response? What do we do? Train. What are you gonna say? Train. Workshops. Credit, which often involves training. That is such a good answer, and I wish that was true. I wish that was true. She said helping with childcare, which is like a magical answer, but it's not actually what happens in real life. I'm sorry, but I wish it did. I don't want to disrespect your answer. I wish that was true. RCTs to put girls into schools. Yep. Yes. Yes. Education, training, which is great. I mean, there's not anything intrinsically wrong with training programs. The problem is that these programs do nothing to address the underlying structural issues that led to women's exclusion from these systems in the first place. It's my view that to move from a piecemeal approach to tackling inequality to more sustainable outcomes, we should turn our attention to institution and organizational changes that facilitate improved outcomes for women. Next slide, please. Luckily, there are some amazing gender champions out there who are pointing the way. Authors like your own Iris Bonet, who wrote the incredible book, What Works for Women. I've already mentioned the book, Caroline Criado Perez's book, Invisible Women, which is where I think the world was awakened to this, this crash test dummy situation. I'm gonna put in a plug for my organization, Valley for Women, which is rife with resources and tools and how-tos. And the Gender and Economy Center at the University of Toronto Rotman School also. Case studies, all of these lessons in terms of how to take a gender disaggregated approach and what the benefits are and how you can avoid risks. And I was going to wrap up this talk by pulling out some of those best practices to share with you. And then I stopped. And I decided, next slide, please. I decided to leave you with this. Just ask. Whatever work you're doing, it doesn't matter. This has relevance across all fields, all sectors, whatever work you're doing, just ask the question. Ask for data. How might this problem be different if I looked at it from the effect on women, how women are participating, how women's preferences, how might it be different? Ask women their thoughts, and then ask the institution you're working with what budget they have to assess the unique needs of women, to gather feedback from women on program objectives and outcomes, separate from the head of household, right? Where they can talk more freely, how well they're doing communicating with women about the risks and benefits of the programs you're designing. Just ask. So now I'm going to put you in work one last time, and you're going to get back into your groups and talk about that. What is something that you're working on right now that doesn't have an explicit gender dimension, but where there might be a question in it that you could tease out with the right data on what the disproportionate effect is or could be on women in your project? I'm going to give you, again, 2 minutes. What? Okay. Thank you. Can I ask you to come back? Can I ask you to come back? Hi. Hi. I for a second considered just leaving and like letting you work on this and then being like, I wonder what amazing projects could come out of this if I just left. And I spent the last 20 minutes really fleshing out their thoughts. I was tempted. Would anybody be willing to share a new kind of dimension? Yeah.
Over at CID, and we're designing a learning module for city leadership with the Bloomberg Center for Cities. And we have written a module, and it has like an equity perspective in some of our like examples and case studies that we have. And it's looking primarily at like racial equity and thinking about data. We thought we could add like a gender perspective to each analysis that we have already written in, and that's fairly actionable like next week.
Yay! I love it. That's wonderful. Okay, someone's got to top that. No one wants to go.
Thank you. So I work over at Global Support Services. I'm in international security research, specifically advising travelers who go to places with high and elevated risk. And so basically, you talking about the electricity and the outages kind of reminded me, we were looking at the large nationwide power outage in Pakistan that happened earlier this month. And so it makes me think that we didn't really look at the effects of female travelers and females who are studying, researching there against how it might affect males. So I think going forward, that's just an example, because obviously we look at everything, but it might be interesting going forward next time that these events happen, stuff like power outages, you know, when political occurrences happen and, you know, economies change and overall, when big things happen that affect travelers that like we're advising, I think it might be interesting to look more towards the effects of women going forward. So
you are all making me so happy that I might just start crying here. So just be prepared for that. Were you going to share something?
We don't have data of the value of the contribution of not paid work of women to the economy.
That's right. That's and the story of that. Do you know the story of that? I'm not going to tell it correctly, so just Google it. But there's a female economist who was on the team that was putting together the initial building blocks of GDP, and they were observing people's labor activity, and she suggested that unpaid care work should be factored into GDP calculations, and her colleagues said, nah, that's not work. So that's how we got to where we are today. Next slide, please. Okay, sorry, we discussed. Next slide, please. Okay. So in closing, I want to honor the women of the generation who came before me, who I know, who opened up the space for me and for women in my generation by going through some pretty serious challenges. My mom was here on the left. She was putting my dad through law school and was looking for jobs and was sexually harassed during a job interview and stormed out. She was offered the job if she would be accommodating. This is my mother-in-law. She passed away last year. She was one of the first women to ever graduate from her dental school. And while she was studying there, she was told routinely that she should be ashamed of herself for studying there, for taking the spot of a breadwinner who needed to earn money for his family. And the last person is Pat Flynn. I just met her last week. And she was telling us about a board directorship interview at a bank. And during the interview, the interviewee asked her why she had never had kids. And she said, actually, I have a son. And he said, well, how could you possibly be a good mother with such a busy career? Part of the official interview. These actions are taboo in some workplaces, illegal in the US, but still happen to many women in the US and in the countries where we work every single day of their working lives. And it is not up to them to do the changing. They are busy enough as it is. It is up to us to incentivize the institutions that hold them back to evolve to a more inclusive future. That starts with you, the questions you ask, the data that you demand. And now you too are part of the solution. Thank you.